interestingly, for me at least, I was a phone freaker when I was very young, when I was 12, 13 years old, and so deeply interested in electronics and technology. By virtue of my involvement with that kind of shady stuff, I was moved into the law. And so I like to say that I became a lawyer to keep from going to jail. And as a consequence of that, I spent a long time away from technology and then came back to it with the advent of the earliest personal computers, the old Tandy machines and so forth. Became deeply involved in computers, building them myself, programming them and what have you. And that naturally led to trying to share the wonder of personal computing, the efficiencies, the growth of the first bulletin boards going back a long time, then the fledgling internet, the pre-web internet, and then of course the web. And that has just snowballed to every time I found out something that I thought was really extraordinarily cool, trying to share it with my colleagues in the law. And that made me serve as a teacher, a speaker at various professional continuing education programs. I've done well over 2,000 programs and papers at this point. I like to write, and so I've written papers originally on paper back in the day, and then a blog for ALM called EDD Update, then my own blog, Ball in Your Court, and I teach at a law school at the University of Texas in Austin, where I do digital evidence and electronic discovery. And so all of that just got to the point of being asked by judges to assist them with the burgeoning challenge of electronic evidence. I went back to school to become certified as an expert in digital forensics, computer forensics, and was repeatedly appointed as a special master by the courts to assist the courts in matters involving electronically stored information and forensics. And I've now served as a digital evidence special master somewhere between 42 and 50 times at this point, which I think is probably going to be more than anybody else in the United States has ever performed that role. I like to think so anyway. Yeah, I took an attitude of I was never going to be a blogger as it was known at the time, but I was asked by my editor when I was doing a paper column in the then called Law Technology News, LTN, now I think it's called Legal Technology News, for ALM Media. I was asked by my editor, Monica Bay, who's probably well known to this audience, whether I would begin contributing to the then new EDD Update blog. And so I began regularly learning to blog, how to keep the entries short enough to be accessible, but hopefully detailed enough to be useful. And then I've carried that on to my blog called Ball in Your Court, or you can get to it at craigball.net. Forensics is changing. I think probably you need to be aware of that some of the magic we could do with forensics in the old days has gone away by virtue of the advent of full disk encryption and solid state media. But for everything we've lost in forensics in the old look at the physical media approach, we've gained in the plethora of new metadata, new logging, new transactional recordings that we can look at to reconstruct in enormous detail the actions of people. Very few of us fail to leave a long digital tail behind us as we move around. And this has not diminished as we've moved to the web and to the cloud. If anything, we are leaving more trails, the most of them being reflected in that mobile device that you're looking at right now that probably rarely leaves your person or your hand. You probably spend on the order of 4 hours or more a day looking at that little device. But while you are looking at it and pulling information in, it is pushing out information about you, where you go, how many steps you take, what you search for. And as a consequence of that, and the myriad apps and the geolocation and the accelerometer and the altimeter and all the features, you have been instrumented as a terrestrial astronaut. In many ways, each of us today is as instrumented as the Apollo crew when they went to the moon. And instead of just checking our vital signs, the devices we carry today instrument what we're interested in, what we do, what we purchase, where we go. And I think that is going to prove to be the most extraordinary development in the law. having the ability to know from an unbiased, trustworthy, ever-vigilant electronic witness where people were, what they did, who they were with, is going to revolutionize the proof of certain challenging issues that we face in litigation today. The things that pains me most is when lawyers come to me and they say, I'm going to ask the court to have the other side turn over their phone, turn over their computer, and I want to just say, stop. There's a way to go about this. You wouldn't, in the old days of paper, said, I'm going to ask the court, not in a civil case, I'm going to ask the court if I can kick in the front door and rifle through their offices and their homes. Would never have been allowed. But that's the same thing, essentially, as asking to look at someone's phone or computer. It is looking inside their head. It is a private and protective space in certain ways. I know that doesn't go down well with some of my fellow forensics colleagues who want to get to it, and sure, I want to get to it too. But the reality is that we have to have a way of first forcing our opponents who are required to produce this information to use appropriate means, the right tools, the right techniques, the right searches, the right processing of the data to reasonably ensure that what they have available to them to review for responsiveness and privilege is the right information to begin with. I've talked about something called the streetlight effect, and that is the willingness to look where it's easiest to look instead of looking where what we are seeking really resides. And we suffer from the streetlight effect now, which is to say that we are looking on computers, we're looking at documents, we're looking at the things we found probative a decade or two ago because we figured out how to do that instead of looking where people really live, which is in social networking, collaborative applications, messaging, and other mobile-based communications. That's where the evidence lives today, and nobody really wants to look there because they view it as too hard. So forensic protocols are designed to be able to guide the other side, to ensure a sense of trust that what you are requiring of your opponent to do is what your own forensic examiner believes or would believe is the appropriate way to go about it. Now, fallback position, if you can't trust the other side, if they've shown their true colors as being obstructive, is to bring in a neutral. Someone like me, a special master who specializes in forensics work, and then they will use a protocol that reasonably balances the legitimate privacy needs and trade secret needs of the producing party while being able to assure the requesting party that if what they seek is discoverable, it will be found and it will be turned over in a useful form. Competent lawyers need to go where the evidence goes, and that's going to be in the cloud. Now, if you're asking me, will we have the same meta values, the same indicia of information associated with cloud-based data as we do on local media? The answer is no. We won't be able to get to much of what we've seen as important in forensics in the cloud. But the cloud has its own special additional information, its own logging, its own transactional recording, its own metadata. And so while we won't have what we are used to, we will have an entirely new menu of data to choose from, and the aggregation of information into the cloud means we won't have to chase data in quite as many places as we do now through the old computer, the new computer, the personal computer, the business computer, the laptop, the desktop, the old phone, the new phone, the distal media, the external hard drives, the backup tapes. We've had to chase data a lot of different places. The cloud is pulling it into one place that will allow us to access it with tools in the cloud. And so electronic discovery in particularly, and secondarily computer forensics, will ultimately be aided, but only so long as the lawyers and the examiners are able to adapt and use new tools and new techniques and new methods of interpretation to be able to provide that very useful assessment of what really happened here. The real evidence resides on mobile devices and in the cloud. So if you want to get to the most probative evidence, if you want to get to the most candid communications, you can't keep hoping you're going to find a memo or a letter or some kind of formal document. You have to realize data today, evidence today, is data for the most part, not documents. And if you want to be a successful lawyer in the 21st century, you have to go for the data. That data lives in mobile devices. That data lives in the cloud for the most part. Don't assume that because you've used technology and devices all your life, you've been a gamer, you've always had the latest phone, that your comfort level with technology translates into a facility with the marshaling of electronic evidence. There are additional things you have to learn, additional concepts. And if you're going to be the captain of the ship in litigation, don't assume that you can delegate your understanding of electronic discovery and the use of forensically significant information to a third party, and you don't have to know anything. You've got to know the fundamentals yourself. You've got to learn the lingo yourself. So again, young people, you like computers, you use devices, that's great. You're not afraid. But now be willing to acquire the real skill set you need to make the most of your comfort level with technology. Yesterday I was privileged to be asked to spend over an hour sitting on a Broadway stage with the legendary investigative journalist Bob Woodward, who many people associate with his history-making work with Watergate nearly 50 years ago and working in conjunction with Carl Bernstein. But in fact, since his triumph in the Watergate investigation back in the 70s, Bob Woodward has produced a book at least every 2 years. He has 19 books out, of which 14 of those books have been #1 New York Times bestsellers. So he's a prolific individual in terms of his contribution to investigative journalism, which many call the first draft of history. But more than that, he was an insightful, engaging, very courteous and warm individual, and I take it as a great personal gift that I was allowed the chance to spend so much time with him, both privately and on stage, and get to know this legendary figure. And it proves something that I've found time and again when I've been asked to interview celebrated individuals, again, a great luck and great good fortune. And that is that when you get down to the people who are extraordinarily successful in a success that lasts, you'll often find that they are decent, humble, approachable people, the kind of people you really would like to know and be friends with, that they ask about you. They're self-effacing, they're generous with their time, they don't mind signing autographs, they don't mind having pictures taken, not out of ego, but out of courtesy. And that's what I found in Bob Woodward. He's just a wonderful guy. Well, I use 2 venues for putting out information, and I don't charge for anything. You don't have to give up anything as far as not even your email address. One is my blog, ballinyourcourt.com or craigball.net. But the papers that I write, in particular this Mobile to the Mainstream paper that I published earlier this month, that's at craigball.com, craigball.com. I put papers on the left side of the page. As we're sitting here in Legal Tech, and I've been to about, 22 Legal Techs over the years, maybe this is 23, and I've watched it grow and grow and grow to serve only the largest law firms, only the most well-heeled corporations, because the services, by and large, that are being sold, particularly in the e-discovery realm, are simply priced out of what accounts for 80% or more of the litigation that drives justice today. And it gets me upset that everybody wants the mansion and nobody is going to deal with the mobile home. I realize that it's much more financially satisfying to serve the AmLaw 400, to serve the Fortune 500, and I'm just saying, most people I know didn't go to law school because they wanted to be a corporate lackey. most of us went to law school with the idea that somewhere along the line we were going to help people and help society. Well, that means that we have an obligation to be able to make tools and techniques available that don't lock the courthouse doors. I mean, imagine if you were sued, heaven forbid, and you went to a lawyer. Let's assume you've been cheated out of $10,000. Well, $10,000 may be a princely sum to you on any given week. I certainly hope so. And certainly you wouldn't want to lose it, right? So you go to a lawyer and you find out that once you've found a way to pay the lawyer, who is not likely to do that on a contingent fee, you're going to be required to front money to deal with your own electronic data. Why? Because in all likelihood, your lawyer has no facility internally or a skill set to deal with your electronic data. If you're suing someone who has a lot of relevant electronic data to the transaction, your lawyer is going to need money to obtain and host and review the information that's produced in discovery. So all of a sudden now, because the cost of electronic discovery has been allowed to grow to be only served by the most expensive providers of services, you are essentially unable to find justice. And I think that's a much more serious problem. I think that underlies, in this country and in many other countries, a frustration with the political system because they can't turn to the courts in order to resolve their grievances. So it is our responsibility, and by our I mean the electronic discovery industry, to be able to find scalable solutions. And that includes lawyers who don't have the budgets to buy the services and delegate this, to learn enough about electronic discovery to, yes, do some of it themselves. Lawyers are acting out of fear. They're saying, I'm not an expert. I don't want to make myself an expert in the case. I don't want to have to be disqualified because I'm going to testify in the case. And all of that is ridiculous. Ridiculous. These are ministerial tasks. These are not functionally different than saying, I'm going to make my own photocopies of documents rather than sending them out to a photocopying expert. Because once you understand these simple, fundamental, low-cost tools and techniques, it's not fundamentally different than it would be making a photocopy to be able to preserve mobile data and extract potentially responsive mobile data from these devices. It is that simple and that cheap. And so I call upon my colleagues to learn how to do it, to add to their toolkits and utility belts the tools that allow them to do it in a case of any size and complexity. If it gets hard enough and big enough, and there's enough of a budget to hire the tremendously skilled services that are populating the trade floor here at Legal Tech, go for it. But that doesn't excuse you from knowing how to do it for the rest of us who need justice.